I am Andrew Hahn. I am a C and VP revenue leader, best known for 4 exits and an IPO and multiple time laid off. Background in HR tech, cyber, wellness, and AI, where I take good revenue to great revenue. Here today with Andy Jolls. Andy and I met about 7 years ago at Pavilion. We've actually worked together. We built something great and actually helped that little company get acquired. Andy, welcome, and please do an intro to yourself and background.
Yeah, happy to. And I can't believe it's been 7 years. Wow. I was gonna say 5 or 6. I didn't have the math right. But the quick background for me, 25 years in marketing, 12 of those in the CMO seat. I've done everything from pre-revenue up to 600 million in revenue in terms of merge transaction. And I've rebuilt 5 funnels, and I think I've done 6 rebrands. So I've done a lot on the more sort of digital quantifiable side, but I've also done a lot on the rebranding side as well. And as you said, we know each other from Pavilion. I have a couple of roles over there. I'm the envoy for the CMO function, or that group, that community, which is over 1,200 leaders. And then I've done that for, almost 6 years now. And then in the last couple of years, really helped stand up the AI and go-to-market channel, which started when Jonathan and I took it over. It had 173 people in it, and now it's got 2,700 plus folks in it. So
it's grown quite a bit.
Yeah, it's grown quite a bit. It is like a little startup.
And Andy, you and Jonathan Moss are also teaching a class at Pavilion about AI and GTM. Maybe you can speak about that for a second.
Yeah, so part of the the expansion of growing, not just the topic and interest area of AI, we realized education was a pretty big piece of this, and so we were asked to become deans of the AI in go-to-market school, and finished up our first cohort of that school in Q1, where we had, I think, over 600 people register for the class. This time around, we've got over 750 people registered for the class, and our first class is tomorrow. So if you're somehow hearing this in time, we do accept some late registration. Then please sign up. The classes are recorded, but I'll just give one more thing about what's different about this.
Please.
Is our class is very much focused on hands-on keyboard. We just thought that what was missing was there were a lot of classes that would be a lot of screenware, a lot of just PowerPoint ware, and people weren't really getting a chance to build anything. And I certainly learned, one of the crazy things in my background is that I went to cooking school for 2 weeks at the Culinary Institute of America. And what I realized is that it's a big difference when you're actually the person who is filleting the fish and stirring the pot versus just sitting in an audience trying to watch somebody else cook, which was the first way that I actually experienced cooking classes. So that's what we're trying to change.
That's why I don't trust Instagram quick cooking best of, because yes, mine don't turn out that well. So you and I have worked together. I focus a lot of my time on top of funnel.
Yeah.
And I'd say that top of funnel, inbound, outbound has changed more in the last 6 months than it has in the last 6 years.
Oh, I didn't introduce myself.
Yeah, go.
I was in a flow state, but yes, Imran,
I'm Imran Patel. I'm the co-founder, CEO of Syft Data, and one of the co-hosts. So we do this podcast, GTM Field Notes, and this is just one of the series that we are doing, and excited to share notes with Andy and Andrew.
Love it, Imran. And apologies, we were jumping into the fact that AI has changed more in the last 6 months than it has in the last 6 years.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk about what's different today than even a few years ago.
Yeah. Well, look, I think looking back, and really the milestone moment, was November of 2022, because that's when the world started to really change. But then, I try to look at each year that we're going through and figure out, like, what is this the year of? And I remember last year, a lot of people saying, wow, this is going to be the year of the agent. 2025 was going to be the year of the agent. And to me, it felt like, wow, this is more like the year of the pre-agent. It's more of the year of the workflow, and more of like the nascency of, like, trying to get into workflows. And so we saw a lot of folks graduating from 2024 where they were, doing a lot with content and, figuring out like, oh, I've got a call with this prospect. I'm going to basically use ChatGPT to do, a account dossier on the prospect, so I'm prepped for the call.
Kind of an intro level Google search on how we used to research prospects.
That's right. So, I think last year we started to get more into workflows, and a lot of us were playing around with Make.com and N8N and Zapier and the various workflow products that we could get into. And in the last 6 months, we're just now really starting to see, I think, a lot more focus on, being able to do this with agents. So just in the last few weeks, and it was sort of I don't know that I made this prediction publicly, but I would tell there are certainly other marketing leaders. I would say, look, you should go learn how these workflow products work, so it can help train your thinking. But we're probably going to get to the place pretty quickly where you and your teams won't even use these, because the LLM stacks are going to come for this, and they're just going to try to take it. And I think we're just now starting to see that really happen, where people can just kind of tell an agent what to do, and it'll actually go build out the workflow for them.
So I think you bring up something really important. Obviously, the knowledge of the system, how to prompt, understanding your desired outcome is imperative. But much like a chief revenue officer, a chief marketing officer is now being tasked with ownership of so much.
Yeah.
There's a difference between expertise and proficiency. So within an organization, we'll say a big SMB or a low mid-market, who should own AI?
So this is also changing quite a bit. I think, a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, we felt like the way to roll out AI was to give everybody in the organization AI and be like, let's go get an enterprise license, let's go get a Teams license, let's get everybody trained up on this. And while I do think that's an important path for change management, I do think a lot of the bigger successes in the last few months have been a couple of people in the organization. It's usually either the CMO and the CRO, or the CMO or the CRO and the RevOps leader. Okay. And those two people kind of getting together and really figuring out, gosh, what are the big chunky things that we could go attack here that could really, we can sort of build the infrastructure for the organization and help set up this, at least within the go-to-market organization.
That's the strategic side. So I think that's the outcome. What can we be more efficient and more impactful? How about the operation side?
Well, I mean, I think it's not just the strategic side, because it is really helping to build in an agentic way, helping teams like figure out, how do they have a thought partner in the thing that they're trying to build. So of course, like we start with the efficiency piece, but the real reality of this, and I know we'll get into this, but I'll answer the question even before it gets asked, is for all the promise of AI, none of the people that I know are actually working less than they did 6 months ago or 12 months ago.
Are they working smarter?
They're working smarter, but they're working harder. And I think we've just, we've done what my prediction was, which is that we just raised the expectations of what's possible.
Yeah.
And so, this is what's always happened for me in history is we've always just basically said, oh, well, we can do all this now. Like my great example, I think, is all of the kitchen innovation. And we got all these amazing kitchen appliances, and it all was supposed to mean spending less time in the kitchen. And we actually spend more time in the kitchen now than we did in the 60s and the 70s. And that's because we just raised the expectations of what a meal should look like. And so we're doing the same thing in go to market. We're just sort of saying, well, I should be able to get this thing that used to take me a week to get. I should be able to get that in an hour. Yeah. And everybody knows that. So everybody's trying to build that in both, strategically and operationally.
And do you think that's kind of, I think that is people who, the folks who are earliest on this were like coding, the developers, right? And they are already feeling some of this, which is the work expands to fill the time in a way.
Sure.
But in the coding world, it's actually the feedback loop is quite immediate. You can see like how much you can ship, like how much product you put out. Do you think in go to market, like, and I guess this kind of segues into this topic of we have a question like what's the ROI of all of this stuff, right? Which is, are we doing there's a lot of activity and a lot of motion, but is there enough like output? Like is the pipeline flowing because of all of this, right? Are we as a marketer, like, are we creating more more awareness, more leads, more of those things? And so like how do you kind of then, right, in your view, like how do you assess the outcomes? Is it purely like volume now, or is it like are there better indicators?
No, it's definitely starting to shift. And I think again that shift of having that revenue leader or the marketing leader tied with RevOps, they're starting to say like, hey, I want to go focus on the things that are the most outcome focused.
Mm-hmm.
So if I've got project A, which is just going to raise a vanity metric, whereas I've got project B, which I can really measure on conversion, then I'm going to focus on project B. And I think maybe 6 months ago they might have said, well, there was just a lot more whack-a-mole playing on. I call it AI whack-a-mole, where they basically said, well, this looks cool. Let's go work on this. But now we're starting to really focus in and say, well, I've got to make the right choices. And the tools are helping us as well, right? Because you can just point Claude at this problem and say, well, where should I focus? If I care about outcomes, then where should I focus? And it will tell you, and it'll say, well, I would do this first over this. If you've got to, we've got to make a choice and we've got to stack rank what we're going to work on, then we're going to work on those types of things. So you're starting to see folks do more, like on the marketing side, more iterative landing page, tweaking, because that's just immediately measured in conversion rate. And so they were like, okay, I'm getting the conversion rate, but then trying to track that, making sure they've got the tracking all the way down the line.
So you're talking about best practices, or approaching best practices. What are companies as a whole getting right? Where do you see them failing most frequently?
Yeah, I think the failing most frequently thing is just not taking the time to sit back and think about this strategically. Somehow with AI, we have forgotten a lot of the quarterly planning that we used to do. And we used to say like, okay, like let's sit down and actually look at our OKRs and try to figure out, of these OKRs, can we run them through a scoring system that this is like high impact, low lift, and just do like a 2x2 matrix. You're starting to see that a lot more in the last couple of months, but that was missing, I'd say, back in January and last fall. It was just like teams were just going, and now they're starting to go, wait a minute, like I've got this house where I've got 1 million AI projects going on. And I don't even know how this, just because we needed to get people going. And so we just, and I think probably the same thing happened in cloud. On the infrastructure side was cloud happened. And you just sort of had this initial stage of people just sort of playing whack-a-mole with cloud. And they were like, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And then the next stage was like, well, wait a minute, let's go figure out what are the big things that we need to tackle. And let's go do that in cloud first. And so I think we're starting to see that happen now. And just you're starting to be, and I guess the thing that I'm really noticing, Andrew, is all the people that I really thought were some of the brightest and best CMOs and CROs, even if they were late to AI, they've now caught up and surpassed a lot of the weaker CMOs and CROs who were early, because they just were super talented to begin with. And now they got to sort of, strap on the I was going to say the Batman belt, of AI. And so I'm really starting to see that start to sprout through. And it was always my, I guess, statement on this is, I always thought in music, there was going to be music, there's going to be AI music. And then there's Hans Zimmer with AI. It's like if you take the most talented composers and basically, and they're willing to embrace the tools, those are going to be who's really going to win.
I love what you said, and I want to challenge it / support it. I think we almost needed some time to play around and mess up and do things right and do things wrong. You look at a company like
100%
eBay that started out as a marketplace for Pez dispensers, and the market told it what it should be. So I almost think it was a natural progression where we had to give people a tool and have them make mistakes and have them have successes, because that shiny toy, we all knew it could be something bigger and better. And it started this wave of strategic thinking. And as you're talking about Mozart or anyone else, it goes back to the composer of AI and what their vision is for the output. Now the tool is going to challenge them, help them think in a quicker, more efficient manner. But I love that progression, and we have to make mistakes to get better.
Yeah, I think so. I 100% agree. I think part of what we just need and still need, because we realize when you look at the statistics, the penetration rates are still pretty low. Even though in a place like Pavilion, 95% of the folks are actually using AI, but people sort of score themselves between a 5 and a 6 on the AI maturity curve on a scale of 1 to 10. So they're using it. They're just not using it to the level of maturity that they probably want to be.
So that leads me into, so my wife is a chief product officer, and we nerd out and we talk about AI and what's coming down the road, what we should be proficient at. There's a level of imposter syndrome. We're probably the top 1%, but it keeps us up at night knowing we're not the top 1% of the 1% of the 1%.
Right.
Maybe you can talk about yourself as that top of the funnel, either your imposter syndrome as you wake up each day or what you're seeing in the market.
Look, it's real. I have it. I think everybody seems like they should have it, because the pace is, it is just, we've never seen anything like this. We've never seen anything like this in the history of mankind. So, it has a faster adoption rate than the internet. And you think about that for a moment. So I try to remind myself that every day, even if I'm teaching, I'm learning. And I think just having that approach kind of keeps me sane, because I think you could easily drive yourself insane just feeling like you're behind. And I guess I validate through, I know I wake up every morning and I know I'm intellectually curious. And so if I know that, then sure, I know I'm going to be behind some other folks. But am I making progress myself? And the scorecard is really just among oneself. It's not like I'm not competing with my wife or you guys. Like, I'm just trying to see, like, can I get better? Can I get 1% better every day at what I'm doing? And so that's really kind of what I try to show teams as well. Because I think the real problem with this imposter syndrome is there is a unbelievable tendency to just want to run when you should be crawling or walking. And I think part of what's that?
Or watching on the sideline to see how others are running.
That's right. So, I mean, I do think we're trying to get people to like move from watching on the sideline first and just and saying like, hey, let's just get you into the game. And so, and you've probably seen me do this before, Andrew, but I often teach people through personal experience, and I'll tell people, I'll hold it up here and I'll say, look, like I've got these apps into the core of my phone.
You called me out. I remember we were either in New York or Austin, and you said, like, if you don't have them in your dock, they're not your go-to.
Yeah.
Damn, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think to the point of experiencing this imposter syndrome, I think for people who are watching, one of the this feeling is not just limited to people who are like normal practitioners of AI, right? People who are, like, to me, the most revealing thing was in December when Andrej Karpathy, who's like one of the guys in AI, right? The person who coined vibe coding as a term, essentially. He used to run, like everybody knows who's Karpathy. And he put a tweet out saying that on a normal day, he feels left behind. And so that's like the 0.0001% of AI user, right? And so I would say it's pervasive, and I think it just, if people feel that way, that there is, I think imposter syndrome is a wrong framework to think about it right now with AI, because it's moving so fast that there is nobody who's an expert at it. Right? Even the experts themselves don't consider experts at that thing. So because it's just moving so fast. So I think the way to think about it is, like, as you said, just like jump in the water and try to swim like everybody else is, and struggle, knowing that nobody is perfect. There is no benchmark in this space right now.
Isn't that the beauty of growth? And I agree with you. So everyone knows my metaphors end up in basketball. But even LeBron James wakes up each day and how can I be better? Yeah. What can I look at? What can I do better? So Imran, I think you're right. It might not be imposter syndrome. It's a true yearning to become more talented and more impactful and more resourceful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to get at is that there is just like I think the uniqueness of the situation is there is no LeBron James in AI. Right? Everybody is trying to figure it out. Yeah. Right. And the people who are like, I mean, to Andy's earlier point, where like the early practitioners that took on AI, and then the late adopters have now surpassed the late, and generally that's not how it works in a field, right? Like you kind of people who have an early start, they kind of build on it. In AI, I don't think that's generally very true, because what you try, like, maybe you were very good at working with the models that were like, 3 months ago. But the models have just moved so fast that whatever you kind of learned in terms of how to prompt them or whatever, it just doesn't matter anymore, because the models kind of are just much more smarter. It's just a very different kind of situation.
Plus, there's going to be somebody who's going to hear this and watch this, who's going to say, who's Karpathy? Right? And that's okay. That's where you are in your journey.
Right.
And that's
By the way, when you say someone's going to listen to this, I think we're going to listen to this in 6 months and say, wow, we were wrong on 30% of this because of the rate of change. It'll
just
be like,
30%.
well,
well, look, so to that point, when we taught our class in January, Jonathan and I put up pie charts of what our AI stacks looked like. And in January, he and I were already over 50% Claude. The class was still over 50% ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And so we were a little bit ahead of the curve. And what we needed to be careful of too was the class was sort of asking us, well, do we need to go where you two are?
Mm-hmm.
And we said, well, not necessarily. It's not that yours is necessarily wrong. We are people who are by our trade having to use 4 or 5 tools. You might be in a company which is all you have access to is ChatGPT, and you don't have access to Claude or to Gemini or any of a number of different tools. So, and I'm happy to talk about sort of what's in my stack, but you're right. Like Andrew, it's like 6 months from now, we're probably going to look at this and go, well, that was funny. Like, you were using that. I do think we're starting to use a lot fewer unitaskers. And I just think that was going to naturally happen. So there were a lot of tools that I used for a couple of months and it did one thing really well. And then, the LLMs caught up and said, I want to take that piece of, land.
That's interesting because you're talking about individuals effing around and finding out, which I think is important. Talk to me briefly about ethics and compliance and regulation, if you don't mind, where I'm an employee and I'm taking my gong calls and dropping them into an AI that's not approved by my company. Now, that happens more and more frequently, and now we're just throwing it out for almost public consumption of our intellectual property and differentiators.
Yeah. So I think, that particular use case, I of course would tell people don't do this. That's not a smart idea. Yep. That being said, when folks are inside a company that they're restricted to one particular tool set, and if that tool set is, say, not the one that's getting all the press right now. Mm-hmm. I think the example that we could put on record right now is saying, like, for the companies that are using Copilot as an example and saying, okay, you're using Copilot. So I still really advise the teams. I'm like, well, on the personal front, you should be playing around with some of these other tools. Yeah. Because if you want to convince your IT department to adopt these next set of tools, you're never going to be able to do that until you actually use the tools yourself. So the other thing that I find,
move it almost from an opinion to a fact, where I'm able to do that.
So and I would say, this wasn't on our question list, but the thing that I think for me that I haven't seen enough traction with in terms of learning is using synthetic data. Mm-hmm. And so I think there is a tremendous opportunity in so many use cases to say, well, I'm not going to convince IT department that I should be able to use this tool. Yep. Because I can't run it on our data set to see how the outcome of the tool really works. And I'm constantly encouraging teams to build out. I haven't put this in my Git yet. I probably should, but like I have a 10,000 row, 30, it's now up to like 35 column CRM. That's all synthetic data that I just give to teams to let them like go play around with this. You don't know how to do data analysis in any of these tools, please practice here first so that you can actually go to your IT department and say, this is what would be possible if I could actually have this tool set. The other thing I want to touch on quickly is, I think the other thing that go-to-market teams aren't doing is they've sort of stood on the sideline and watched product and engineering teams get approval to use Claude Code. And, they haven't fought hard enough to get it themselves. They've sort of just accepted like, well, we're giving it to the engineering team because they absolutely need it. But we don't think you all need it on the go-to-market team. And, that feels a little bit different kind of historically, because now there seems to be sort of this like have not situation that's starting to sprout up in companies where certain teams get the tools, but other teams don't. And it used to feel, and that was true from a licensing price perspective for years, but not from just like a utilization perspective. And now I think more go-to-market teams need to be leaning harder. Now, that being said, I was at a B to B to C software event last week, and there were way more people using Claude Code than I expected.
Wow.
For some reason, I had the bias that I was like, oh, on the B2B side, like we're ahead. We felt a little more ahead on maybe on use case and sort of AI maturity, but in terms of the tool set and what they were using, they were in there, they were using it, and I was impressed. I was like, okay, this is great.
That's awesome. So we're talking a lot about use cases and ownership and outcomes. Let's talk about outcome a bit. Potentially talk to me about successes or failures for yourself, and of that success, what type of measurable lift did you get? What was your objective approach? What was the outcome?
Hang on, somebody's trying to call me. So look, I think in terms of starting what we talked about, I think it's really important to just kind of go back to the beginning and figure out where do you have either the problem or the biggest opportunity. And for instance, at the top of the funnel, Andrew, if you can identify the trigger point for when somebody actually needs your service, that's a huge thing to go focus in on. In
market buyers. Absolutely.
Right. Well, and I don't even love that language, because in market always implies to me like they're going on to Google and they're actually searching.
Right.
But it's more that that's just market readiness, right? That they've actually done something to like to get guys, I need to pause for 1 second.
Sure.
Let's restart that question. I apologize. My son's calling me and he's
go for it.
Hey Molly, can you call Evan? Hey Molly, can you call Evan? I'm on a podcast right now. Can you call Evan back? I'm on a podcast right now.
His kids would be like, "Oh, Dad is like a celebrity. He's on a podcast."
Oh yeah.
I should have hit the mute button first, but that's okay.
No, we'll edit it out, or we'll just keep it in.
Or keep it in.
It's more authentic. Like all these podcasts are very like polished and stuff.
Yeah,
so
this is like Jay-Z.
When me and like Greg and like, or Andrew like recorded, like just sort of, we want it to be.
All right, so
let me get you back on track. I'll ask you the question. How would you like me to ask it?
Oh, are you going to ask me the question again, or just want me to go straight to answer?
Yeah, let's go straight to the answer. We can probably cut it out.
Yeah. So I think, starting with that trigger point of figuring out, on something that if when a user is moving to being sort of more market ready and being able to focus in on that. So this was something that I did recently for a client where they knew what that trigger point was, but they had no way to figure out how to identify it.
Okay.
And not a clean way. They were spending 30 to 60 minutes a day sort of combing news sources, trying to find some sort of evidence that a company had moved from, this place to that place without saying too much. So, and I was just able to build them a tool that would actually do this and send this out as a digest on a daily basis. So the first thing they get in the morning is basically, it's essentially a digest of trigger movements that they can actually take that and as an AE go and basically go, okay, I'm gonna go attack. And that's really, by the way, like that's phase one. Phase two is basically saying, okay, now how do I turn that into more of a workflow and say like, not only is it giving them the digest, but it's actually scripting the emails for them. And then they can sort of just tweak the emails and send them out. Phase three is like, okay, can we actually build this into more of a sequence? And you're getting it to do it in more of a sequence fashion. And so that kind of thing, it's early on, but I think we're going to see like, the speed to lead is going to go up by like 30% because it's just made such an impact for them to get that hour back in their day and be able to focus on, replacing that with higher grade activity. So I think that's the thing that we're all starting to focus in more is I know I stopped myself in a way that I didn't a year ago, which is not only do I think like the outcome question, but part of that outcome question that's layered in there is this thing something that happens with frequency, that I can turn this into a routine so that I try to stop myself from or refactor it in such a way. Like win-loss analysis is something I felt like this is really great, but the way I looked at it 6 months ago was, gosh, I'm just going to do this sort of once a quarter. And it's really good, but I'm going to do it every once in a while. And now I'm starting to reframe it and say, well, can I actually do this in such a way that if there's enough volume that it can actually do it every week? And so we're trying to constantly iterate based on what we learn. That's easier to do that in a higher volume example.
And I think your point about making it a routine or a habit is, I think, very important, because I think in this new sort of AI-enabled workflow world, like what ends up happening is that people do a lot of ad hoc interruptive stuff with it.
That's right.
And I think, and to your earlier point about, it's actually funny because it's like it's a sort of a indirect plug for Syft itself, because we kind of catch intent signals, like just like how you were trying to find like this custom signal that you built for this company. And then the second part of it is activation, like, you activate something. And what we have learned is that two things. One is that if you can view that signal in a daily activity, then it actually is more effective. So like for an AE, the best thing that they want is like every day, like here are the 5 accounts you should focus on. And I'm assuming you build something like that, which is like, okay, these 5 accounts have moved on to this stage now based on some data source, some intent, and that you should, out of the 100 accounts that are assigned to you, like these 5 are actually showing some life that they're like, today. And then, and that's like falls under the sort of the daily stuff. For a human review, the second part we think is like more effective is also like, just to your point about speed to lead, is like, can you make certain things where human review is not always necessary, more automated, right? Which is that again, it's like if a human can kind of just then like, okay, these are the 5, here are the 5 draft emails in your Gmail sitting for you to review and send them out, then you kind of just move that habit like one step further, right? But the main thing is just, can you kind of just integrate that thing into their workflow and push the ball as farther upfield as possible.
I want to touch on this topic a little bit, though, because I think one of the things that's also happening now is there's so much on LinkedIn that's like, I replaced X with Claude Code. And I've even had it, in addition to the classes that we teach, we do these monthly sessions. And, in our monthly session, somebody was ready to rip out a piece of software. And I was the person who kind of jumped in and said, or before you do that, did you know that you could just have one of these agent tools talk to the software so that you can keep your system of record, which, by the way, is SOC 2 compliant, right? And is used by other people in the company. And so you can actually, instead of just like ripping this thing out, that you actually just want to like figure out, can you get the outcome that you want to get by basically just attaching something that will do the natural language version of learning the UI.
Yep.
So this is something that I do quite frequently now, is I'm just having AI agents go into tools and use them, because I know the tools are well built. I just know that the UIs, even if the UI is well built, I just don't have time to learn it. So, and why should I learn it if I know that that Claude or ChatGPT or one of these others has a whole training set on learning it? And as long as I'm in a good reasoning model, I can just be a partner and we can actually build together, and it can feel just very natural. So did I know how to build workflows in HubSpot a few months ago? No, I always had people on my team who did that. Do I know how to do it now? Not really. I have an agent that I work with that will actually do that with me. So I do think something's happening within software that, there are certainly tools that are going to get knocked out and they're going to get replaced. But there are lots of tools that I feel like are going to become sort of the enablement platform. Yeah. And you're going to be like, well, I've got to use this thing. So I'm not going to make any bets on public stocks yet on these statements, but I find it interesting that some of these tools that I think are pretty good systems of records, and where we really just don't love the tool is having to use them. Like none of us really likes to use, none of us likes to update Salesforce as an example, right? But we like it as a system of record. The executives love it, from that standpoint. So it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves.
I was thinking, I was like, is Andy going to say HubSpot or Salesforce or Workday, one of those?
Pick, right? I think that's one thing I just sort of see happening now. Whereas like a few months ago, we got really excited about the young startup that was talking about, I'm gonna basically knock out all my middleware. And it's like, that seems really cool, but it also seems like it's fraught with a lot of actualization problems in terms of actually getting work done.
It's funny that you talk about HubSpot, Salesforce, Workday. These are essentially Frankenstein's monsters. They're the leaders in the industry, but between acquisition and add-ons, to your point, they're tough to use, but they are the foundation of how we've built our businesses and will continue to use them. A couple more questions, Andy, and again, thank you for being here. We talked about imposter syndrome. We talked about how things are going to change. What's in your basket? What's your secret recipe on how you stay relevant and not distracted? Is it newsletters? Is it noise on LinkedIn? What are your go-to influencers to stay relevant?
Yeah. So I'll name a few people that I follow. And so besides some of the people that we've talked about, I read Dan Chipper, who's every. I get a newsletter called The Neuron. I used to pay a lot more attention to the newsletters than I do now. Now I feel like I'm jumping more on to Twitter or to X or Reddit, and I'm starting to build agents to basically go look for information that's more narrow, sort of within go-to-market. But there's no sort of secret recipe. I do think Robert Scoble built something that is like a daily digest tracker that I now start to read. And then there's something that I do on LinkedIn that I'll share with you guys. But my challenge with LinkedIn is I want to see more from my feed. So there's something that I do in there to see more from my feed, versus just seeing what they think I'm going to be interested in. So I think that's a little bit of what I do. But look, I think a lot of this is also being in community and actually talking to people. I think I get more out of that, and probably more out of the Slack channel interaction in various communities, to see like that's where people are talking about the new twist on something that we want to dig into.
It almost goes back to what you said before, is we're becoming inefficiently efficient, because we've built efficiencies, but we're still figuring out how to maximize this.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I would add to your point about the Slack communities, I think there is like two kinds of sort of knowledge percolation layers, right? One is that like from the outside to the inside to your organization. One thing that we have, and we'll do like probably a piece on this later, which is like one thing that has been a huge unlock for us inside Syft has been making our AI use multiplayer. And so one thing that you can do is like a lot of people will use chat or Claude in their own little kind of sessions. And so if you have a very good AE who is like, is great at like, prompting ChatGPT or like putting together different tools, their expertise kind of just stays locked in their session. And we, like a lot of like startups, we started using OpenClaw in Q1. And the way we deployed it was that we deployed it in our Slack workspace. So now we have a channel where we do go-to-market chats with our OpenClaw bot. There is one where we'll do content engineering. The other one would be like product and design. And so there are all these channels where like, and it assumes different personalities in any channel. So in one, it acts as a PM, and another one it acts as a content marketer, and so on. But the main important thing is that people see like, like, okay, well, there is a feature that we are now building out. Like, how did it come about? Well, it came about because of some customer feedback. And now we can kind of see that Slack thread where two people jammed with that thing to get to where it needed to get to. Or like we wrote a piece of content, and this interview will actually go there as well. And we can, there is shared context about like why are we doing this, and we're doing this because like there is a thread about it with the bot, because it's truly a coworker. And the second thing is actually the people who drive it actually teach it to everybody else, because now we can kind of see like, okay, well, this is how this product feature came about. And next time, if I'm an engineer and if I have to kind of build a small product feature, I'm supposed to kind of have that conversation with this thing. And so I think that has been a huge unlock, which is that like I think the internal knowledge diffusion and percolation is, I think it still is an unsolved problem for a lot of people. And the larger the organization, the more the value, because how can you make your best rep, like how can you replicate them across your team, right? How can you make your best marketer kind of? And I think a lot of people just haven't yet, I think, gotten to that place where their AI use is truly multiplayer, where as a side effect of their use by some of their savviest employees, everybody else gets better.
Andy, what is one question we didn't ask you that you want to communicate and educate the audience?
I think you didn't ask me about AI training.
Please, let's talk about that
very specifically. And look, I think we've got a problem in AI training right now, in that where that ecosystem kind of developed was very much like, oh, I'm going to do a 2-hour or a 4-hour or a full day training session for your team. And teams got all rah, kind of worked up. And then 2 weeks later, they're not developing habits. And so I heard somebody else say, the problem with training in AI is you need to meet people at the moment when they really need it. And so I think where this is evolving is having more folks who are going to be in it longer in terms of the training and meeting with teams and letting teams build those habits, and working with teams and giving teams that vulnerability to experiment and to fail. Like I didn't really directly answer your question about failures earlier. And that's because like a lot of the failures I can point at they're sort of in this like failed state right now, but I still have them sort of in a workshop folder because I'm like, I'm not sure these are really like done for good. It's just like, oh, I need to come back to this and I'm going to go work on other stuff. And that needs to happen, within the change management piece, because that's what I see is they're not dedicating the time to put into this, or they're not given the time by the organization. So it's like, well, you still have all these, your regular job you have to do, but you somehow have to do this also. So they're not, kind of given the space to do it, but the organizations aren't helping enable them to help build the habit. So I think that's the thing that's going to be really changing. And I know that's what I'm starting to do with more organizations is build that so that I'm like their person who's riding along with them. It's no different than the ride-alongs we used to do in sales when you were training, right? Is basically like, let's do like AI ride-alongs and have, you come along and be the person to say, hey, that's great. I wouldn't change a thing, or say like, hey, that's really great. Here's another way that I'm seeing this done over here in a different community.
You got me thinking, as you both know, I have a background in e-learning and education and corporate guidance, and there's a bunch of approaches to learning. One is the mandatory, everyone has to do this by this date. And we've all done that training where we open up a window while we're looking at something else and get through it. It doesn't benefit anyone. I think there's other training methodologies where you can do some micro-learning on a weekly basis or what it might be. The reality is people are going to learn when it's most relevant and important to them and when they have the hunger. People need to intrinsically have the motivation to want to get better versus shoving it down their throat. But I think they can play together by educating them on the foundation and encouraging that hunger. I think one of the best ways to show it is outcomes and outputs of those that do. Those that put in the work and have those outcomes.
Yep. I completely agree.
Cool. And just before closing, so when's the one more chance for you to plug in your upcoming pavilion session?
Yeah, the first class is tomorrow. I mean, we call it the first class. We actually did. We believe in breaking a lot of the rules in terms of how things are typically done. So we had a class 0 last week, which was office hours, which was really geared towards people who feel like they're really struggling with imposter syndrome. They're feeling like I'm really at the beginning. So we just said, like, let's have office hours and help people get ready, because we realize the course is going to be a lot for some folks.
And who is it best for? What kind of people should sign up, and where can they sign up?
Well, it's designed for go-to-market practitioners, right? Yeah. So that's the makeup. You can only actually attend it if you're a Pavilion member. So that's the only way to get in, is actually to join Pavilion. But we of course we're biased. We think it's worth it. And I will say that we get a mix of people who are 101 level and 201 level. So we try to keep the hands-on keyboard focused on both use cases, so that we can solve for for both, which is difficult. But we find that there are people who get value on both sides.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, thank you, Andy. I'm inspired, I'm scared, and I'm motivated, which I think was the goal for this.
There you
So I
go.
appreciate your time, and looking forward to taking the class.
Yeah, looking forward to having you. See ya.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Bye.